There we go. So we'll be reading today out of chapter 2, section 5. It's actually in two parts. We're going to do the first part today, the function of the miracle worker, and the special principles will be done in our next session next Saturday. Because there's enough in what we will read today for one session. Clearly, we don't. So before we read the new material, let's read a few lines that were in the previous section, in section 4, not section 5. You don't have to find this in your book. David, I'll ask you if you would do that.
Our emphasis is now on healing. The miracle is the means, the atonement is the principle, and healing is the result. All healing is essentially the release from fear. To undertake this, you cannot be fearful yourself. You do not understand healing because of your own fear. A major step in the atonement plan is to undo error at all levels.
Okay, so we're going to deal head on with fear here. And you, all of us, so when I say you, we really mean people, us, do not understand healing because of our fears. Our fears interfere with our understanding of healing. Healing is the result of being free of fear. So if you're in fear, you can't understand healing because you're in a state of mind that is opposite to that. So it seems circular. You can't undertake healing and be fearful yourself. So how are we to escape from the clutches of fear? Well, we've got a plan, a heavenly plan called the atonement. And a major part of that is the undoing of the mistakes your mind was making of projecting your own fears onto a screen. This is a mental screen, not a physical screen, projecting your fears onto the screen of your own mind and believing those fears are real. One more line from the previous section.
Healing as release from fear. The value of the atonement does not lie in the manner in which it is expressed. In fact, if it is used truly, it will inevitably be expressed in whatever way is most helpful to the receiver. This means that a miracle, to attain its full efficacy, must be expressed in a language that the recipient can understand without fear. This does not necessarily mean that this is the highest level of communication of which he is capable. It does mean, however, that it is the highest level of communication of which he is capable now. The whole aim of the miracle is to raise the level of communication, not to lower it by increasing fear. Before miracle workers are ready to undertake their function in this world, it is essential that they fully understand the fear of release.
Okay, so tonight's section is about miracle workers, and this is the introduction to it, but there are prerequisites to being able to function in this world of time and space with miracles. And one of them is, so let's just step back one second. A miracle is interpersonal. It's between persons. It's a transaction that has to do with soul content. The content, you're dealing with people's souls, and it frequently involves communication, language, and words. And it's essential that the person who is in their right mind, we'll call that the miracle worker, be able to adapt their language and communication so that the person who needs help is capable of understanding and receiving in that moment. And so you have to express your soulful helpfulness in a language the recipient can understand without becoming afraid. And remember, the problem is that they are afraid. So this is an art to express yourself in a way that won't precipitate further fear in their mind. It doesn't mean that the way you're going to speak is the highest way that that person could ever understand. It just means in that moment, this is the highest way they can receive in that moment. So therefore, before a miracle worker is ready to undertake their function at working miracles, it is essential that they fully understand the fear of release, the release from fear, the role that fear has in their own mind. And once you realize the role it has in your own mind and understand how to release your mind from that, then you can be of helpful to others in releasing from fear. So all this was said really as background material for what we're going to read tonight. Noel?
So the fear of release is the other person's fear of releasing maybe their problem and releasing their own fears. And as you just said, for the miracle worker, it's the release of fear. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, and it goes very deep beyond the words that we might use here, because the individuals establish an identity based around what they believe to be true of themselves. And when that's based in fear, and we talk about moving out of that, well, then the individual becomes afraid of moving out of what they think is their identity. And that's where that original, that image that we showed where to the ego, that's the entering into hell. That's the loss of identity. Whereas to the miracle worker, it's the release from an imprisonment in the fearful nightmare of the ego. So it's very easily confused. What is intended to be for the person's best help can be interpreted as a challenge to who they think they are. So it's essential the miracle worker learn to express in a language that the recipient can understand without becoming afraid. And this is a learned ability. We're not saying that everyone here already has a full and complete understanding of how to express that way, but we do have the Holy Spirit as our teacher, and she knows the lessons already, and we will be getting to that in future chapters. So now, having all that as a foundation, before we do, Heather, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just like that when we place the Holy Spirit in charge of the encounter, she knows what the potential of the person is, and she also knows what would precipitate fear. So that's why it says to ask what you would have me say or do, because, we can overteach and blunder in and say, well, this is what the course says down the road, but it may be very frightening to somebody in the very beginning. So we have to have wisdom to be able to know how to ease into some conversations without precipitating fear in people.
Yes. Ease into it. Yes. Have the other person's interest uppermost in mind. Noel?
Also, when you talk about the person and their own identity, I think of the story that each of us has. Let's say it's someone that you're you're helping or you've been put in front of to help, they may be very reluctant to give up their
Mhm.
story of illness or depression because their identity is tied in with this.
Exactly. Yes. So indeed, and therefore we are dealing with what you could call existential issues here. Concerns the person's sense of identity, and the miracle worker is going to offer a way out. The person may not be ready for, well, let me not say it that way. A person may not have ever done this before, so this represents a bold step in their experience. So I really want to get on to the first paragraph. So I'm going to ask if you have your hand up. Please hold that until we get into tonight's reading of section 6. Oh, section 5, sorry.
Before miracle workers are ready to undertake their function in this world, it is essential that they fully understand the fear of release. Otherwise, they may unwittingly foster the belief that release is imprisonment, a belief that is already very prevalent. This misperception arises in turn from the belief that harm can be limited to the body. That is because of the underlying fear that the mind can hurt itself. None of these errors is meaningful because the miscreations of the mind do not really exist. This recognition is a far better protective device than any form of level confusion because it introduces correction at the level of the error. It is essential to remember that only the mind can create, and that correction belongs at the thought level.
So if you read all of the previous section about the level confusion and the levels, then this would be easier to understand. If you aren't familiar with that, I would refer you either to the video or to read it on your own. So the problem is where the issue that people face is this problem in my body or is it in my mind? And they get very confused about discerning what it is that needs to change. And so we call that level confusion. And one way to rectify that is to understand where the error occurred. And the error always occurs first in the mind's interpretation of what's happening, of what's meaningful, of what I should value in this situation. So if we recognize first that the miscreations of the mind, all its fears, basically everything that we project onto the screen of our belief system and make a worldview out of it, interpret ourselves in terms of that screen and all our relationships, all of that are miscreations of our mind. They are not real. They are completely subjective interpretations. It's a misuse of your mind to fabricate what seems real to you. And if you recognize, and so that's the first foundation of this program, is to recognize your mind is miscreating and projecting fears onto a screen that you have believed are real. And recognizing that is a far better way of bringing your mind back ultimately into a safe place than any form of level confusion. Why? because it brings the correction to the level where the error occurred. Your mind produced an error in believing that your own fears are true, believing your own illusions are true, and therefore the mind needs to be corrected about that. Oh, these are just projections of my mind. They aren't true of reality. This is, although they may feel true to me, they're not true to everybody else. They're not true to the Holy Spirit or to Christ or to God. Therefore, they cannot be real. And so correction belongs at the thought level. This is the central thesis of A Course in Miracles. We must correct our thoughts. All healing will be directed towards correcting the errors of our mind, and the errors of our mind are vast. And it all needs to go. Okay, so let's pause there and take a few comments. Let's see, Heidi, how about your comment first, and then we'll do Richard.
Okay, help me to understand. Our mind is part of our body that is controlled by our ego. Is that correct?
No. So a common misconception, our brain is a part of our body, but we're not talking about brains here. We're talking about something that exists in a different plane of reality, Heidi. We're talking about a mind, which is more abstract. A mind is a part of creation's network of consciousness that extends way beyond you and me and extends beyond our world. A mind is something that was with you at the beginning of all creation. Certainly your brain was not a part of with you in the beginning of all creation. And Heidi, we know that when we take our last breath here on earth, our brain stays behind and we move on. So when we say mind, we're talking about another level.
So does our mind control our brain?
We would say there's a relationship between your mind and your brain, but that might be overstating it to say that it controls it. But there's definitely a relationship there. And we're not going to really try to parse the differences here too much, Heidi. What we're going to do always in the course is go back to correcting the mind and trust that all other things necessary will fall into place.
So all the practice that we do is going towards our mind.
Yes, ma'am. Well said.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and practice, for those of you, when Heidi said all the practice, we're really talking about the workbook lessons of a daily form of practicing to train your mind so that you can learn to sit comfortably in quiet and tranquility and peace. So it's a training.
Okay. One last question. Is our mind out in the universe, or is it part of our soul? Like, are our minds individual, or like God is mine, like everybody shares it? Or is it in my soul?
Right. In truth, Heidi, there's one mind in all the universe and only one mind. However, it seems to us when we're confused that each of us have a private mind. It certainly seems that way. And that's what we call confusion with the ego. For in other words, let's restate it. There is only one mind in all the universe, and the ego is the notion, no, I can have my own private mind,
Got it.
separate from the one mind.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was very helpful. Your questions are really helpful, Heidi, because they're speak to fundamentals here, and that's really what we're trying to establish, especially in these early chapters, are fundamentals.
Thank you.
Okay, some other questions. Richard, yeah, thank you for your patience. Still need to get your audio on.
Here
There
we
you go.
go. What I'm seeing in this work for me is very intimidating. And I'm seeing the side of me that pretended that it was one person, but I'm really another, the different character that I portrayed all my life.
Mhm.
So what is happening, and I use that to control people, conversations, God knows what else. And I noticed that today when I was interacting with someone, and we have similar paths today. And I found myself having to go to a new spot. And I did it, and I guess the word would be with trepidation. I didn't, I guess, not project or pretend that I was that old person. I've been doing that most of my life, that other person. And as I do this, and I was experiencing it today, that my whole chemistry inside of me changed it got out, I got out of my mind and into my body, but into my body where the lowest part is, into my gut, and it felt good. All that scratchy resentments and all those experiences just seemed to dissipate.
Hmm.
And I felt a little uncomfortable talking with this individual, but it got easier. In other words, I was confronting my old self
Hmm.
with this new material.
Mm-hmm. 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 Good.
Yeah, and I believe the word. It's not so much for me or the mind. It starts with the mind, but it works down to my gut and to my essence. And when I get to that spot, it is like so cool, man.
Yeah. Thank you, my brother. Thank you for that reminder.
Thank you.
All right, so I see some other hands up. I'm going to ask you to hold that question so that we can finish the first paragraph. My mistakes, I had coffee late in the day today, so I may be overly verbose here today.
It is essential to remember that only the mind can create, and that correction belongs at the thought level. To amplify an earlier statement, spirit is already perfect and therefore does not require correction. The body does not exist except as a learning device for the mind. This learning device is not subject to errors of its own because it cannot create. It is obvious then that inducing the mind to give up its miscreations is the only application of creative ability that is truly meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Really, it's all summarized right here. The three levels, body, mind, and spirit. Of those three levels, spirit doesn't need any help. It's perfect. The body is just, will do what you tell it to do. It's not error prone. It doesn't have beliefs that are mistaken. So we're not trying to change the body's thoughts. It's the mind, Heidi. Remember, we just said a moment ago that it seems as though we have a private mind. That's what the ego is. the thoughts that I have my own private mind and that I can make up truth of my own, that's where the issue lies. And the entire Course of Miracles pivots around making that correction in the mind about what it is and what its function is. And we cannot get to miracles until we correct this fundamental error. So it's essential to remember it's the mind that's doing the creating, and that correction only belongs at the thought level. For those of you, I want you to remember that forgiveness has two phases. First is your willingness to let go of the error, and the second is to correct the mind with the truth. Just letting go of an error is not moving forward. You have to bring the truth to your mind, which is the correction. So it's all progress will be based on letting go of the false and correcting your mind with the truth. So this is the only application of your abilities that it is truly meaningful, in the sense that this is what moves you forward. This is what moves all people forward. And collectively, when large numbers of people do this, it moves this world forward. All right, let's go on.
Magic is the mindless or the miscreative use of mind. Physical medications are forms of spells, but if you are afraid to use the mind to heal, you should not attempt to do so. The very fact that you are afraid makes your mind vulnerable to miscreation. You are therefore likely to misunderstand any healing that might occur. And because egocentricity and fear usually occur together, you may be unable to accept the real source of the healing. Under these conditions, it is safer for you to rely temporarily on physical healing devices, because you cannot misperceive them as your own creations. As long as your sense of vulnerability persists, you should not attempt to perform miracles.
So we need to get our ducks in a row. It begins with making fear, using your mind to make fear. And as long as you still are afraid, as long as you still are afraid, you don't feel safe, you don't trust, as long as you still feel vulnerable, as long as that persists, you're not ready to attempt miracles. We have to first deal with the misuse of your mind to miscreating fear. We will call that, one form of miscreating with your mind is magic and belief of what you can. It's magic. It's a belief in spells and potions, and in physical medications as being able to heal your mind. Physical medications do not heal your mind, but you can believe they do. And so does the Course in Miracles say you should not use them? Clearly not. In fact, as long as you are feeling vulnerable and afraid, it says under these conditions, it's safer for you to rely temporarily on physical healing devices, because at least you can't confuse them with the errors in your own mind. At least you know these are physical devices you're using. So what we have is a challenging task here. We've got a mind that's afraid, that's producing its own fears, that believes those fears are real, and then projects them on all levels, body, mind, and spirit. That's level confusion. We need to stop those projections, stop misusing the mind to project fear, and understand that the only level on which the problem ever existed was the level of our mind producing these fears. And then once that happens, we will once again remember that our being is invulnerable. Our spiritual being is invulnerable. It remains the same as it was created throughout all eternity. It's pure and unblemished and undiminished. So we have a rest. So, and once we learn to stop projecting fear, we'll no longer feel vulnerable in the world. And then we're ready to attempt to perform miracles. So remember Miracle Principle 26, the undoing of your fears is essential part of the atonement value of miracles. And that although miracles are natural, they are a part of what you were created for and sent to this world. They're natural, but first you have to purify your mind of its own production of fear before we can participate in that. Heidi?
Okay, I'm sorry if I'm asking the same question. I just want to make sure I've got it. Before I go to bed at night, I pray to the Holy Spirit and give the Holy Spirit permission to heal my mind while I sleep. Now, so the Holy Spirit controls our mind? Is that true?
No. The Holy Spirit is your gentle guide you're doing very well, Heidi, to ask for guidance, for help in healing your mind. But she's not a controller. She's a lot like a light to your mind who you can use or not use.
So what controls my mind?
Well, in the initial state, Heidi, the ego seeks to be in control of your mind.
Okay, who can I pray to ask for my mind to be healed where it's gonna help?
Oh, well, you're doing right to turn to the Holy Spirit to pray. Yes, that's what you want to do. But you have to realize what you have been doing of your own accord, which, and I don't mean you, Heidi, to single you out. I mean us, what we do. When our ego is in control of our mind, we produce a living hell out of it. And that we are doing of our own free election, not consciously, but we're participating in it. That's what needs to stop. Stop the miscreations.
Okay, so the way to help it to stop is through the lessons and the book and asking the Holy Spirit to send it light.
Yes.
Correct?
Yeah. Yes. In fact, the lessons tell you to train your mind to learn to sit calmly and comfortably and without having your mind race off in every different direction.
Right.
That's part of the mind training, is to pull control, not pull, where the ego wants to continue to do what it's always done. And the training is to reverse that and undo that pattern.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we've got it. So this is why I call it the fear chapter, chapter 2. And I mean that in a nice way, in that it introduces and makes the framework of what's going wrong around here, which is that a mind unaware and untrained keeps fabricating its own private thoughts and makes it into judgments, guilt, and fear, which produce its own living hell. That needs to stop. And that will only stop when you decide that you're ready to commit yourself to learning a new path and training your mind so it won't continue to do what it's always done. And the workbook lessons are that guide, daily guide for how to do that. Susie?
I just wanted to add something that might be helpful. I've been listening to Heidi and her questions and some of this stuff you've been saying. So, you know, when I started all this, I was in so much fear and, oh God, you know, so overtaken by my story and my ego and all of that. And as I'm listening to you, I'm realizing that this practice of the lessons over and over and over again brought me to a point of even just the beginning of being able to say, okay, I might not be out of fear, but I know for sure that it's my ego taking over my thought system. And that those first 50, and I'll even say like 30 lessons were really helpful for me to just gain the awareness, oh, I'm not in the right state of mind. Let me sit still and try to get some help. You know what I'm saying? So it wasn't just, oh my God, I'm out of fear, but I slowly, like it says, slowly, gently started to even just become aware what was going on in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so those lessons were completely the key for me to start rethinking and healing my mind.
Susie, that's so helpful. Thank you. I find, having worked with hundreds of miracle students, for whatever reason, one of the most difficult lessons to learn for people to learn is to be responsible for the thoughts they're producing. To say exactly what Susie just said, I'm the one that produced that. I own it. And I haven't yet learned completely, as she said, to stop, but I know where it's coming from. And that, for some reason, that is, I see students struggle just to square themselves up with the reality of their own miscreation, that they are the one that's doing the miscreating. So be willing. It's all about your willingness to admit that you're producing your own nightmares. All right, we'll go on.
I have already said that miracles are expressions of miracle-mindedness, and miracle-mindedness means right-mindedness. The right-minded neither exalt nor depreciate the mind of the miracle worker or the miracle receiver. However, as a correction, the miracle need not await the right-mindedness of the receiver. In fact, its purpose is to restore him to his right mind. It is essential, however, that the miracle worker be in his right mind, however briefly, or he will be unable to reestablish right-mindedness in someone else.
So I believe the use of the word essential is very purposeful here. We're not just throwing that out lightly because we don't have, he's not using that lightly. It's essential, the miracle worker be in his right mind. And until that happens, we were told earlier, you should not attempt to perform miracles. It's essential. The miracle worker being in his right mind doesn't mean you have to be there all the time, but you have to be there in the moment when the miracle is being called for, or else you won't be able to help someone else be in their right mind. That's what a miracle is. Someone who's in their right mind helping someone else to find their own right mind. And so the power of the miracle is that we said before, there's two people involved, one person that's in their right mind and another person that in that moment can be ready to look at things a better way, is open, at least to some extent, at considering another possibility. And the purpose here is to restore that person to their right mind. But no one can do that when they themselves are imprisoned by fear. So when we say miracle worker, we mean someone who at least at times is able to step out of the hell of their own making, referred to in the Course of Miracles as the ancient prison, to step out of that mental box, that mental cell, be free, recognize the truth of our purpose here, and only then can you be truly and meaningfully helpful to someone else. And Julie Staley, you know, we talked about this quite a bit over the last 2 weeks, I think. And the fact that you may sometimes be able to access this state of mind called right-mindedness or miracle-mindedness, this is no cause for celebration. We're not exalting. Heidi, the ego would want to exalt its own accomplishment to say, hey, look, I'm in my right mind now. Look at me. It would want to inflate itself with self-deceptive ideas about its own specialness, its own importance. That's not what is called for here. The right-minded neither exalt their mind, nor do we depreciate our mind. It's a tool. And so not to avoid this issue, the miracle worker cannot depreciate the mind of the receiver either. And we will get to this much more towards the end of our reading tonight when we talk about charity. You can't view the other person, let's see, Lynn and Heather and other people that work as therapists will appreciate this. In miracles, we don't view the other person as having a condition that makes them broken or impaired. We exercise a different vision of them as whole and complete and helping them to get back to the awareness of their wholeness. We'll have more to say on that towards the end of this reading. So the right-minded neither exalt nor depreciate the mind of the miracle worker or the mind of the miracle receiver. Everyone is viewed as worthy of our love.
The healer who relies on his own readiness is endangering his understanding. You are perfectly safe as long as you are completely unconcerned about your readiness, but maintain a consistent trust in mine. If your miracle-working inclinations are not functioning properly, it is always because fear has intruded on your right-mindedness and has turned it upside down. All forms of not right-mindedness are the result of refusal to accept the atonement for yourself. If you do accept it, you are in a position to recognize that those who need healing are simply those who have not realized that right-mindedness is healing.
So, this takes the emphasis where it belongs. We said before, the ego wants to control your consciousness. It wants to be, and it's an imposter that wants to appear as you. And so, as long as you're concerned with yourself and your own readiness, this is not recommended. What is recommended in miracles is that you trust in source. You trust, Heidi, in the one mind of Christ is ready for a miracle, and that your consciousness is joining with the mind of Christ for a miracle. So it's not little me that's ready. It's that something bigger than me is ready, and I'm joining with that. So we maintain a consistent trust in the Christ mind. It shifts the emphasis away from our own preoccupations with our past and our inadequacies, and puts the emphasis on the bigger purpose here, which is to heal the world. And you can't do that with a little mind. You need the mind of the atonement for that. So, and that won't happen all the time. Sometimes fear will grip you, and that's a clear indication that you're not ready in that moment for a miracle. So what are we to do, David?
The sole responsibility of the miracle worker is to accept the atonement for himself. This means you recognize that mind is the only creative level, and that its errors are healed by the atonement. Once you accept this, your mind can only heal. By denying your mind any destructive potential and reinstating its purely constructive powers, you place yourself in a position to undo the level confusion of others. The message you then give to them is the truth that their minds are similarly constructive and their miscreations cannot hurt them. By affirming this, you release the mind from over-evaluating its own learning device and restore the mind to its true position as the learner.
Mm-hmm. So I don't often do this, but I'm going to ask if we can together read aloud. You don't have to turn your microphones on. This first sentence together. We're going to do it twice. The sole responsibility of the miracle worker is to accept the atonement for himself. Once more. The sole responsibility of the miracle worker is to accept the atonement for himself. Until that happens, you're not working miracles. You have to get yourself and your own mind in the right state. That responsibility has to be acknowledged first before you can be of help to anybody else. Part of that attributes, what description of what happens there is that you deny your mind the tendency to use it as a weapon. You deny your mind any destructive potentials and reinstate only its constructive powers. And thus, you undo the level confusion, your mind is not meant to be a weapon of attack. And if you don't recognize when your mind's attacking, then now's the time to start learning. When your mind criticizes others or yourself, when your mind condemns what others are thinking or doing or saying, or else does that to yourself. Or maybe it's something milder, like just complaining about others or yourself. That's using the mind in opposition to another. And we will learn that that's confusion of levels. It's using the mind to attack as if it was something that you would physically attack, only we're only going to do it privately in our minds. So atonement is a way of denying your mind that. You need to learn to stop miscreating with your mind and deny your mind any constructive potential. And at the same time, affirm the truth, which is that your mind is here only to be helpful and to heal. David, did you have your hand up?
I did, because I was a little confused about something. Because what you said about your mind attacking others and this, that, and the other thing, that's not really my mind. That's my ego.
Ego mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, ego.
So that was what I wanted to be sure we were saying. And that the mind that we're talking about here, the mind that has no destructive potential, and is the mind that's atoned. In atonement. So that mind would not have the attack thoughts. That mind is, like tomorrow's lesson, I think, is I have the mind of God or something like that. And that mind is not attacking, is not destructive, is all of the things that are not what you were talking about.
Right, right. And this is the very issue of the separation, David, is having our mind hijacked by a set of beliefs that we are separate, that we are vulnerable, that we are fearful, and then using the mind inappropriately. This is ultimately, David, an issue of will, of what is it you want to do with your mind. The mind will do what you tell it to do if it's trained. But when it's untrained, it tends to, as we know, will run on the lessons it has learned in this world, which are, and we see great evidence of lessons in this world being used to attack others. Hostility, attack, defend phenomena. Yeah, so that's the very issue, is the split mind concept of a mind that was intended for only good being redeployed into fear and darkness, and this course being to bring that mind, that power of mind, back to its original purpose. Susie?
So for me, it's this sentence, here's the guarantee of the course. Once you accept this, your mind can only heal.
There you go.
And it's just, there it is, you know? So it's kind of like what David was saying. When we accept this, the atonement for ourselves, or even just accept the fact that I want to be in right thinking, my mind can only heal.
Yes. Yes, and the word we shouldn't ignore here is the word once. So prior to accepting the atonement, the mind can be used inappropriately. Once it's accepted, and maybe this happens with each passing day and each passing hour, we accept the atonement, and the mind can only be used creatively once we accept it. So therefore, our responsibility is to accept the atonement for ourselves. It will always, friends, there's a reason why I repeated this. No matter how far you go in this program, we'll still come back to, in this moment, are you accepting the greater plan of God for creation and your part in it? Are you accepting that for yourself in that moment? Are you in your own right mind? Because if you're unconscious of any of that, if you're divorced from it, if you're in opposition to it, then your mind will be afraid and start to defend and attack, defend itself and attack what it perceives to be those who are attacking it. It's deep, profound confusion of the ego. So the untrained mind will overattend and it's an error, overattending, overvaluing, and over-identifying with what it perceives to be as a vulnerable body. Let's go on.
It should be emphasized again that the body does not learn any more than it creates. As a learning device, it merely follows the learner. But if it is falsely endowed with self-initiative, it becomes a serious obstruction to the very learning it should facilitate. Only the mind is capable of illumination. Spirit is already illuminated, and the body in itself is too dense. The mind, however, can bring its illumination to the body by recognizing that it is not the learner and is therefore unamenable to learning. The body is, however, easily brought into alignment with a mind that has learned to look beyond it towards the light.
So the part I'm running a little behind here on covering the material tonight. So gonna make short work of this, but the aspect I like to emphasize here is that once the mind recognizes the atonement for itself, once the mind stops projecting fear onto others and into the world and is only used for constructive powers, then the mind comes to regard the body in a favorable light and uses the body in cooperation for the purpose that the mind has, which again is the recognition of your role in the atonement. So the body then is easily brought into alignment in accord with the goals of the mind. That is, it becomes an effective device for working miracles. And really, it's not, I know there might be a tendency to want to make a bigger narrative out of what all that means. It just means that the body will be adequate under all conditions to work miracles. All right, let's go on.
Corrective learning always begins with the awakening of spirit and the turning away from the belief in physical sight. This often entails fear because you are afraid of what your spiritual sight will show you. I said before that the Holy Spirit cannot see error and is capable only of looking beyond it to the defense of atonement. There is no doubt that this may produce discomfort, yet the discomfort is not the final outcome of the perception. When the Holy Spirit is permitted to look upon the defilement of the altar, he also looks immediately toward the atonement. Nothing he perceives can induce fear. Everything that results from spiritual awareness is merely channelized toward correction. Discomfort is aroused only to bring the need for correction into awareness.
So I can hear Noel saying, why would we ever be afraid of what our spiritual sight will show us? It's a normal question. Why would anyone be afraid of what spiritual vision will show us? It's the right question to ask. And please know that the ego wants to hide that fear in your unconscious mind and keep you from ever looking at it, so it'll continue to reside in your unconscious mind, unrecognized and unexamined. So we got three things that are said here, and this is going to be a lead into the next paragraph, so we're just going to make quick work of this. First of all, why would you be afraid of what your spiritual sight would show you? Two, what are they talking about? The defilement of the altar. What do you mean the altar has been defiled? I thought it was an altar, a holy altar to God. How could it be defiled? And what are we talking about? The Holy Spirit, the awareness of the Holy Spirit and discomfort. Discomfort is aroused now by these things. Well, it's aroused for a reason. That is to bring your mind back into its proper state where it accepts the atonement as your state of being and out of the confused state of false thinking, false perception. So three things there that are like negative warnings that would seem strange: a defiled altar, a fear of spiritual sight, and spiritual awareness are bringing about discomfort. Well, we have to look a little closer to understand this. And by the way, your ego does not want to hear what we're about to go over. This is not cheery, because what we're talking about is, can I use a metaphor? It's like an infection in our mind that would prefer to remain hidden and untreated, and we're going to look at it. And it's not necessarily to be greeted warmly welcomed initially, but it's for our own good. David? Did I skip let me see. No, I didn't.
No, you're fine.
Okay, thank you.
The fear of healing arises in the end from an unwillingness to accept unequivocally that healing is necessary.
That's so good. Let's hear it again, David.
The fear of healing arises in the end from an unwillingness to accept unequivocally that healing is necessary. What the physical eye sees is not corrective, nor can error be corrected by any device that can be seen physically. As long as you believe in what your physical sight tells you, your attempts at correction will be misdirected. The real vision is obscured because you cannot endure to see your own defiled altar. But since this altar has been defiled, your state becomes doubly dangerous unless it is perceived.
So we have more warning signs here: defiled altar, and now a doubly dangerous situation. What are we talking about? Well, most people are not conscious of what we're about to talk about. So we acknowledge this would be perhaps new learning. So let's take it in pieces. Our spiritual vision, real vision, is obscured because your ego identity, your little self your real vision is obscured because you cannot endure seeing your own altar defiled, what should be pristine and holy and beautiful, it's said twice now, has been defiled. How? I didn't know that. But since the altar has been defiled, your state of mind, your state of unconsciousness becomes doubly dangerous unless it is perceived to be defiled. This is a warning shot, my friends. To allow this to continue is doubly dangerous. And so I'm going to jump ahead now to what a defiled altar is. And you will read about it in detail in chapters 25 through 29. We call them idols. These are the things that every one of you has your own form of an idol. They are things that you regard as precious to your identity in this world. They are things that are so precious to you that you serve them like you would serve a master, and that you treasure them, and they become competition for your devotion to source and to love. They become alternatives. Some people would call them idols. Others would call them demigods. They are, there are many forms. Some people make it money out of that. Other people might make excitement their God. Other people might make status and prestige as viewed by others their God. Others people make power in the world their God. And the list goes on and on and on and on. It doesn't really matter the form. It's the idea of you now have two masters. The old line from the New Testament is you cannot serve two masters, God or mammon. You will serve one or the other. Well, whatever it is that you've been serving that is not God is on your altar, and it's competition. It's viewed as an alternative for your love and for your devotion, for your dedication, and it defiles, it obscures your spiritual vision because you've given it the power to do so. You chose to embrace these things, and therefore they're there because you wanted them. So that's the hidden secret of the ego that is deeply buried, that these things are a part of your false identity. By the way, these are merely errors of your mind. This does not mean that your spiritual safety or well-being in God's eyes is in any way jeopardized. No, it's not. But it does mean that your mind is giving power to a set of beliefs and idols that are clearly illusions, self-made agendas. And here's the bigger secret is ego does not want you to come to recognize these things. We call it the fear of healing. Why would you be afraid to get rid of an infection like that? It arises in the end because of an unwillingness to accept that healing is necessary. So, Susie, we talk about willingness all the time. Let's talk about the shadow side, the unwillingness to accept that there's something on our altar that is in competition with God. And it's there because we treasured it so much that we committed ourselves to making that our idol. So what we're talking about arouses fear in people. The ego does not want this information to come into your mind, because what it would mean is its grip on your unconscious mind would have to be loosened if you were willing to acknowledge that this area needs to be given over to the Holy Spirit. So let's take a comment. Noel?
Is part of healing, or can part of healing be transmuting an idol into something beneficial, such as if someone makes money a god, let's say with enlightenment, the money can be used for beneficial results in the world.
It's a good insight, Noel. I'll tell you, there's two sides of that coin. There's one where I attempt to decide how to transmute my idol. So I made money my God, but now I'm going to decide how to transmute it for good. The second one would be where the Holy Spirit's now guiding that transmuting process. And you're correct in your intuition, Noel, that Holy Spirit can transmute, repurpose anything for good. So absolutely, under the Holy Spirit's guidance, all things can be used for good. But as we know, a lot of times we try a what would be a form of deception? Like we bargain with God. Let me hold on to my idol, God, and I'll use it for good, as long as you let me keep it. So there's a wiliness in there that we would do well to recognize. So it's tread carefully, eyes wide open to those matters. Susie?
So, you know how we talk about two forms of denial, the good denial of the ego. And so this is denial, that, you know, this is a lot of denial that we, an unwillingness that we really do need healing. And I tie these two sentences together to the one from the top. Once we accept this, though, our minds can only heal. You know, once I stopped being in denial that I had all these idols and I was miscreating and all that, you know, all of that was just what was bringing me fear and not right-minded thinking. So I tie those two sentences, and I just feel this paragraph is all about denial.
It is, Susie, and it's a good catch. It was the improper use of denial, denying what would heal you. And part of that, as we all know, I think everyone on this call knows, part of that is a willingness to acknowledge that there's something that needs to be healed, and that I was attached to the part that now I realize is my part of my illness, part of my being held back. Okay, so this next paragraph, so what we've said so far is the foundation for the function of the miracle workers, is this necessity to fully accept the atonement for yourself. And that includes the recognition that there's a need for healing our own interior world, that we may have treasured things that are in competition with God. We've made other things into our God. That's not a warm fuzzy. It comes initially as like a shock or a derating of my the way I might have esteemed myself. It's for our healing. And the sooner we come to recognize the things that hold us back, only then can we really begin to heal. So then there's, we promised to talk about charity. And I mentioned it in terms of when two people get together and one is needing help and the other is offering help. And we said that the person in their right mind neither exalts their right mind nor depreciates the other person. So now we're going to explore that theme deeper here. And one of my favorite words in the Course of Miracles, as it's used, as it's redefined in Course of Miracles, is called charity.
Healing is an ability that developed after the separation, before which it was unnecessary. Like all aspects of the belief in space and time, it is temporary. However, as long as time persists, healing is needed as a means of protection. This is because healing rests on charity. And charity is a way of perceiving the perfection of another, even if you cannot perceive it in yourself. Most of the loftier concepts of which you are capable now are time dependent. Charity is really a weaker reflection of a much more powerful love encompassment that is far beyond any form of charity you can conceive of as yet. Charity is essential to right-mindedness in the limited sense in which it can now be attained.
So every word in the Course of Miracles, and I mean that literally, every symbol in the Course of Miracles has a new meaning in the mind of the Holy Spirit, and it's not the one that we learned. So forget about what you thought charity meant for a moment. Set that into a drawer, and let's learn in this context. Charity, as it's used here, is really a reflection. It's not the source of the most powerful love encompassment in creation. It's not the most powerful love encompassment of creation, but it's a reflection of the most powerful love. It's an experience in time and space, in a world of chaos and sickness that needs to be healed. Charity comes along to help. And charity is a heavenly gift, therefore. It's essential to what we're talking about functioning as a miracle worker. It's essential to the right-mindedness. And what is it? It's an ability to perceive another person in their beauty, in their goodness, and in their love, even if they don't see it themselves. So typically, a person that comes to you hurting and in need has in that moment a diminished view of self. Charity is a way the person in the right mind sees that person not as damaged, as inadequate and as little, but sees them as whole and complete and worthy. And we'll read in the next paragraph about other ways of understanding this. So here's a principle you may not have known. Healing rests on charity. If there's no charity, then healing has nothing to rest on. It has no foundation. And then it would not be healing. Healing rests on charity. Charity is a way of seeing what the person truly is on their inner being, their perfection, and regardless of how the person perceives themselves. And so learn to practice charity. It's an ability. Healing is an ability that is developed. So all of us, okay, zoom up to the meta level for a second. The reason why we are here on this planet in time and space is we're here to help heal. Healing is an ability that must be developed, and it rests on charity, which is a spiritual vision into the soul of another person that sees them as perfect, not as wounded and incomplete and deeply troubled, but sees the perfection of them and believes in them. You can only do this when you're in your own right mind, if you have accepted the atonement for yourself first, then it's natural to see others in that same spiritual light. Noel?
I just looked up the origin of charity. It comes from the Latin meaning dear, D-E-A-R.
It is. You hold the other person dearly. What a dear they are to me. Beautiful. There's something about charity. It's an aspect of love. There's something about it that is so beautiful. We should all aspire to practice charity. David?
Charity is a way of looking at another as if he had already gone far beyond his actual accomplishments in time. Since his own thinking is faulty, he cannot see the atonement for himself, or he would have no need of charity. The charity that is accorded him is both an acknowledgement that he needs help and a recognition that he will accept it. Both of these perceptions clearly imply their dependence on time, making it apparent that charity still lies within the limitations of this world. I said before that only revelation transcends time. The miracle, as an expression of charity, can only shorten it. It must be understood, however, that whenever you offer a miracle to another, you are shortening the suffering of both of you. This corrects retroactively as well as progressively.
Mm-hmm. So this reminds me of the borderlands between this world and heaven. Charity is a gift from heaven that is working or operating within the limitations of this world. But because it's a gift from heaven, it's a reminder, a recognition that we're not separate from heaven's purpose, heaven's calling, that our purpose here is to bring heaven's gifts to this world. So when you're dealing with charity, it's a precious thing. And the miracle is a way that that charity is expressed. So you can experience charity while sitting in a room by yourself and just remembering people you care about and see them as already whole and complete, beautiful souls. But a miracle is when that expression is given to the other person so that they are ready to some level to receive it. You're really, with charity and with miracles, you're really in what is called in the Course of Miracles in the borderland between time and eternity, the borderland between a world that deeply needs healing and a reality that is perfect and needs no healing. You're in that transition zone. We'll have a lot more to say about that in later chapters. But it's being introduced here, and it's an ability you can acquire if you want it. It's a gift, but you need to learn to use your mind in accordance with the gift. If you ignore it, then the ability will remain dormant and undeveloped. But if you welcome it, and by faith you believe it to be worth your attention and your practice, you can learn to practice charity. I think this is a form of love. This is how we practice love. It's not the only way, but it's a beautiful way, and it's a way entirely a part of this course. For it is true that healing rests on charity, and that is essential to the function of the miracle worker. I'm very long-winded tonight. Not going to apologize for that, but we are a few minutes over. So that's all we're going to cover for tonight's reading. Thank you. This is foundational material. I encourage you to review it all, but especially review the things that are speaking to you right now in your life. And we'll get together again next week and pursue the second half of this, which is called Special Principles of Miracle Workers. I promise you to be good. So thank you all. Namaste.
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 Jonica,
Love you
could you
all.
stay on for just 1 minute to help me on my screen?
I sure can, Heidi. Be
Thank
happy.
you.
You're welcome.
Namaste. Thank you.
Thank you for reading, my brother.
You got it.
Good night, everyone.
All right, good night. What is it you need help with, Heidi? Your
Do
screen?
you see on my screen where it says Heidi loves God?
Yes.
I can't make that just say Heidi so you can see my face better.
All right. That was partly my problem. Do you want to rename Heidi Loves God?
I just wanted to say Heidi.
All right. You should have that ability now. I just turned it on.
Oh, where do I go?
Somewhere in the menu, maybe it's under more. It's called rename.
On the bottom, like under apps?
Let's see. Open the participants menu.
Okay.
Find your name and click on the where it says more next to Heidi Loves God.
Oh, rename.
Rename. There you go.
Oh.
Now, but that'll only rename it in this session. I think what you want, Heidi, is to rename it permanently.
Yes.
Okay, so that's
That way you get a clear of my face.
yeah. So that's a little differently to rename.